Hold on to your seats because this one is explosive. Peter Credlin has had enough of Britain's immigration disaster and she's calling it out live on GB News. She's exasperated, she's furious, and she's got one question. Why won't Britain do what works? Because Australia did, and it worked flawlessly. With the intensity of a woman who's seen bad policies destroy nations, Credlin laid it all out. No sugarcoating. The Australian model is simple. Turn the boats around, offshore processing, and temporary protection visas. No loopholes, no legal battles, no endless taxpayer-funded hotels. When Australia was drowning in illegal boat crossings, they took action, and guess what? It worked. Compare that to Britain, where thousands of illegal migrants cross the Channel, arrive on pristine shores, and are greeted with government-funded accommodation, legal support, and a brand new life at taxpayers' expense. It's a national disgrace. Meanwhile, activist lawyers, human rights groups, and the politically correct brigade have made it impossible for any serious action to take place. Credlin did not hold back. She described in brutal detail how Australia physically intercepts migrant boats, forces them back, and makes it crystal clear, you will not settle here. She revealed how, when desperate smugglers scuttled their own boats to force Australian authorities into rescue operations, the Australian government responded with military-grade lifeboats that were unsinkable, deliberately ensuring these migrants had one way back, straight to Indonesia. This was a government with guts. The Royal Australian Navy and Border Protection Forces didn't just sit back and let waves of people flood their shores. They took action, and the message spread fast. The boats stopped coming. And here's the kicker. When Credlin looks at Britain, she sees none of that resolve, none of that political will. Instead, she sees a government flailing under the weight of its own bureaucracy, a government too afraid to take real action because the left-wing outrage machine will scream about human rights and compassion while the country buckles under the pressure. She made it clear, plans on paper mean nothing if politicians don't have the spine to enforce them. If Britain actually wanted to stop the boats, it could, but it won't. And as if that wasn't enough drama for one day, the next scandal is one of the most jaw-dropping political embarrassments in recent history, because a Tory MP, yes, a Conservative Party politician, was rescued from a London brothel after being trapped in a room with 12 naked women, and it gets even crazier. It all came to light in a bombshell memoir by former Chief Whip Simon Hart, a man who spent years dealing with some of the most outrageous scandals Westminster has ever seen. But this was something else. It was a cold November night in 2023 when Hart received a frantic call at 2:45 a.m. from a very drunk Tory MP. The MP, a 2019er, meaning one of Boris Johnson's new recruits, was barely coherent, but just about sober enough to explain his predicament. "I think she's a KGB agent," the MP gasped down the phone. "She wants £500 and she's left me in a room full of naked women. There's CCV double quote." That's right, a Tory MP, completely sloshed, convinced he was about to be blackmailed by a Russian spy. Hart and his team sprang into action, arranging for a taxi to rescue the MP and get him safely back to his hotel before the situation could escalate. But this comedy of errors was far from over, because in his drunken panic, the MP got into the wrong car. It turned out it was a different taxi, Hart later recalled, driven by an Afghan agent called Ahmed. And Ahmed? Oh, he had his own demands. According to the MP, the driver turned to him and said, £3,000 for a B job. Let that sink in. A drunken Tory MP, fresh from a honey trap, now being shaken down by an Afghan driver in a back alley of London. You cannot make this up. Eventually, after fumbling his way through London, the MP made it back to his hotel, locked himself inside, and lived to see another day. But when Simon Hart later shared this debacle with Rishi Sunak, the then Prime Minister was completely stunned. "Poor Rishi," Hart wrote in his memoir. "He doesn't believe such things happen. He's too straight-laced, too trusting. He needs to work in the Whip's office for a day, then he'd understand." And this wasn't even the worst scandal Hart had to deal with. His memoir is littered with tales of drunken orgies, grotesque misbehaviour, and complete chaos among Tory MPs. One report, a special advisor attended an orgy and, brace yourself, defecated on another person's head. Another, a parliamentary staffer dressed as Jimmy Savile was caught having sex with a blow-up doll. This is the state of Westminster today, and it's all coming out. And just when you thought the drama had peaked, Nigel Farage storms in with a scathing attack on Labour MP Zara Sultana for what he calls a full-blown attack on democracy itself. Sultana has launched a campaign to shut down Reform UK's massive March rally, comparing them to far-right extremists and encouraging protesters to block the event from happening. For Farage, this is outrageous. He fired back on GB News, calling it a democratic disgrace and warning that this is dangerous territory. "She wants to cancel us," Farage fumed. "She wants to shut down free speech. And let's be very clear, this is very close to incitement, because what happens next? A mob of protesters shows up, tensions boil over, and suddenly violence erupts, all because one Labour MP couldn't handle the idea of a political party she disagrees with exercising their right to free speech. But Farage isn't backing down. "You can argue with us," he said. "You can debate us, but if you try to shut us down, if you try to stop stop democracy from happening, then I'm sorry, but you're the extremist here, not us. Sultana, however, doubled down. She accused Reform UK of scapegoating Muslims and migrants, calling them a party built on division and hate. But her actions have not gone unnoticed, because in the hours following her controversial statements, outrage exploded online. Reform supporters, free speech advocates, and even some centrist Labour voices have called her out for trying to silence political opposition through mob tactics. And now, all eyes are on March 28th. Will the rally go ahead, or will it descend into chaos, all because Labour MPs like Zara Sultana don't believe in free speech unless it benefits them? This is just the beginning. The scandals are only getting bigger, and if Westminster thought it could keep this chaos behind closed doors, well, think again. If you thought this was wild, just wait. There's so much more coming. So hit that like, smash that subscribe, and stay tuned, because this political roller coaster, it's just getting started. Oh, it's happening again. Another political firestorm is brewing, and this time it's got everything. Westminster chaos, backstabbing, explosive scandals, and a government teetering on the edge. Buckle up, because Britain's ruling class is in meltdown mode, and at the centre of it all, the great immigration betrayal. The people were promised action. Rishi Sunak and the Tories swore up and down they would stop the boats. We heard the speeches, saw the grand announcements, but look where we are now. Migrant crossings are higher than ever, Channel boats are still flooding in, and Britain is being ripped apart by its own political cowardice. Nigel Farage has called it the greatest failure of the Conservative government. Even GB News, once cautiously optimistic, has now turned fully against Sunak's handling of the crisis. Tory voters, they're furious. The polls are crashing, the base is abandoning ship, and Reform UK is gaining ground fast. But let's talk about why this is happening, because it's not just incompetence. No, this is a betrayal of working-class Britons, a betrayal of those who believed the government's promises, a betrayal of the nation itself. For years, the Tories talked tough. They said they'd deport illegal immigrants. They said they'd send them to Rwanda. They said they'd secure the borders. But when it came time to act, they folded like cheap suits. Why? Because they're terrified. Terrified of the woke activist lawyers who take the government to court every time they try to enforce border control. Terrified of the left-wing media that brands anyone who wants immigration reform as racist or far-right. Terrified of Brussels, of the United Nations, of the globalist elites who think Britain should be a borderless wasteland where national identity means nothing. And who's paying the price? You, the British taxpayer, the families struggling with rising costs, the communities overwhelmed by mass migration, the cities transformed beyond recognition by leaders who couldn't care less about the impact on ordinary people. And just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, the bombshell leaks hit. Reports are emerging that government officials have secretly watered down border security measures behind closed doors, deliberately dragging their feet on enforcement, giving in to activist pressure, and making sure that deportations never actually happen. They didn't just fail to stop the boats. They never planned to. And let's not forget the Labour Party, because while the Tories are weak, Labour is worse. Keir Starmer, he's promising open borders in all but name. His party wants to tear down deportation policies entirely. His own MPs, like the radical Zara Sultana, are calling for the cancellation of anyone who even speaks about border control. That's right. If you even talk about immigration, the Labour Party thinks you should be silenced. And then there's the media, the BBC, The Guardian, Channel 4, all of them working overtime to push the idea that mass migration is somehow inevitable, that Britain must simply accept wave after wave of illegal crossings, that even discussing solutions is dangerous. This isn't incompetence. This is a coordinated attack on Britain's sovereignty. And yet, they wonder why Reform UK is rising. They wonder why millions of people are turning against the establishment. Because the truth is brutal, but it's right in front of us. The ruling class doesn't care about you. They don't care about law and order. They don't care about national security. They care about power, about staying in office, about keeping their cosy Westminster jobs while the country burns around them. But here's the kicker. Change is coming. The people aren't stupid. They see what's happening, and this time they won't be ignored. Now the question is, will the government listen, or will they continue down this road of betrayal until Britain is unrecognisable? Make no mistake, this fight is just beginning. Stay tuned, because the truth can't be silenced.